guide us through, but I'll certainly. We are recording, so I'm going to go ahead and call the Finance Committee of the City of Port Orchard for May 18th to order. And the first thing we have is the sales tax report. So, no, I guess we'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Chair. So another great month of sales tax collections. So far, 2021 has been a great year for Port Orchard. When we look at sales tax for April, we collected $456,000, which is approximately 27% growth year over year compared to April of 2020. For the total year, we are 20% above our 2020 collections for 2021. And we're approximately about 28% over our 4-month budgeted allotments. So sales tax, again, continues to be strong, another great period for us.
So Noah, if I'm reading this correctly, this 20% over for the year amounts to just a bit over 344,000. Is that correct?
Correct. Yep.
Okay.
And 448 over budget.
Mm-hmm. All righty.
So all good news on the sales tax front, and good news again on the REIT front. Another strong month for REIT. We collected $178,000 in April for REIT. Again, it's hard to compare year over year, but we do it anyways. So for the first 4 months, we are roughly $384,000 higher than our 4-month period in 2020. More importantly, I think a more important figure is that year to date, we've collected $640,000, which is roughly $60,000 short of our 2021 fiscal goal. So well on our way to meeting our 2021 budget target.
Outstanding.
So if there's no questions on the sales tax or REIT, we'll move on to our fund balance statements. Last week, I sent out our monthly budget report. So I can start there, ask if there's any questions. If not, I'll turn your attention to our cash and investment report here, which shows, again, complete, good and strong, healthy fund balances as we closed out April. We had approximately $8 million in the general fund. We have approximately $3.2 million in our water operating fund, $2.2 million in our storm operating fund, and $3.3 million in our sewer operating fund. So our operating funds are doing very well, really strong. A component of the operating fund is transfers. And again, we make those transfers on as a needed basis for our capital projects, for debt service. And one issue we talked about last month was when we would start making those stabilization transfers. And so looking at the fund balances, we made some transfers. You'll identify here storm. Let me go up to the water stabilization. We transferred $87,000 from our operations to the water stabilization account. We transferred $54,000 from storm operations to storm stabilization. And lastly, $124,000 from sewer operating to sewer stabilization. Again, those amounts represent about 1/3 of our annual budgeted amount. So we looked at the first 4 months, said we're going to break this into thirds and slowly make those transfers over the year as we identify that we have healthy, strong fund balances. I also wanted to note, I pulled the trigger on a couple other transfers out of the general fund. So in the general fund, we had budgeted $250,000 to go to the street fund for both the preservation program as well as operations. With such a healthy fund balance in the 001 fund, I felt comfortable going ahead and making that 2021 transfer and fully executing that. Again, even after the transfer, you can see that we still have a very healthy balance in our general fund.
That's very impressive.
Did you have any questions on the monthly financial report or anything on the fund balances?
Keep it up.
I don't.
Great.
Beck, do you have any?
Well, you know, sometimes my conservative nature comes forward. And because we have had such strong sales tax revenue, do you think we should consider at some point increasing our, what do we call it? I would call it our reserve account. I know we have it, I believe, fully funded, Noah. But I'm wondering if we shouldn't just set some more aside.
I think that's a good topic to add to our mid-year review. Again, we have lots of items on the list that need funding. And so I think
Right.
that would be just another kind of revisit. Does the council want to try to add a little more to that general current expense reserve balance?
Okay.
Saving for a
Agree
rainy
with
day.
that. Yep, rainy day fund.
Right, as long as we, correct, it, like you said, it would be a good topic for our mid-year review, so.
Great. So moving on, I had built this agenda fairly early, so I'm going to condense this into a single presentation.
Hey, Noah, just out of respect for Donna's time, could we knock out item number 4 so she can go on about her evening?
Yes, Donna, you have now been moved up per the mayor's request.
You need to unmute yourself, though.
There we go. Thank you for the opportunity. I appreciate that. So I'm not sure, has everyone had a chance to read the summary about the police grant? Or does that need to just be read and go on record?
I think Donna, you could just give us a high level overview. We've
Okay.
distributed it to everybody so they can have a chance to read the details. But if you give us the high level overview and what it means, then they can
Okay,
ask questions.
perfect. Yes, thank you. So here's an overview in a nutshell. So the Kitsap County Sheriff's Office, they have applied for a grant the last few years from the Washington Sheriff and Police Chiefs Association, and it comes out of the 0.1% grant funds. And what this grant does is it allows them to utilize a crisis intervention officer, and the hopes of this grant going forward is to utilize the DCRs out in the field. And so let me just, I'll read a couple of things here for you. I know I'm kind of all over the place. So it's a designated crisis response team is what the grant is for. And they're trying to they're trying to get this grant so they can have 2 full-time DCRs out in the field. And in order for Kitsap County to submit this grant, they actually would like to partner with Port Orchard Police Department and South Kitsap Fire and Rescue. By doing that, it gives them a little more funding in this grant. And the deadline for this is May 21st, which is why we really had to kind of quickly get this on and in front of the council and the mayor for some type of initial agreement that, hey, this sounds really good. We'd like to pursue this. And that's why it's kind of on the agenda tonight. So South Kitsap, the Sheriff's Department is applying for this grant. They've had it in the past, but they would like to partner with our department and the fire department so that they can bring on 2 full-time DCRs. And what that means is when there's a crisis in the field, and this grant would strictly be for the south end, kind of like a test pilot between South Kitsap Fire, Port Orchard, and the Sheriff's Office, and only for the south end, not the entire county. So it would include the city limits. And so when a crisis occurs and 911's called and the police go to these crises where these people are legitimately in a crisis mode, not always is it best to send the police to try to de-escalate these situations. And so with that thinking, Yes, the police are probably they're going to respond to this, but it gives a DCR the opportunity to use their expertise and their training on to de-escalate this person that's in crisis, in the moment, and in the field, where it eliminates some of our liabilities on our end, where we might amp up the situation, because just having a police officer there, I hate to say it, can be scary. We're in our uniform, we're bringing a gun to the scene. So having a DCR on scene to maybe be able to communicate with this person at a different level. They have different training than what we have. Maybe they can bring this person down to a level that they can communicate with them, and that we can actually get them to whatever resource they need. Probably the hospital is where they probably need to go. And if that is the case, then that DCR would actually go with South Kitsap Fire and Rescue in their ambulance to the hospital to walk this person who's in crisis mode through the process. So we're not just, in our world, we take somebody to the hospital that's in a crisis, we drop them off, and we hope that they get the treatment that they need. That doesn't always happen. And so with the DCR staying behind and literally walking somebody through the process, the success rate, it lowers the recidivism for these people, and hopefully they get, you know, the care that they need and avoid maybe going to jail. That's an option as well. And jail really isn't the end all for mental health, for fixing anybody in these crisis situations. So the goal in this.
So Donna,
Yes.
and this doesn't cost us anything. We're just signing on to the grant. I think it's a no-brainer.
Yeah, it cost us nothing other than it gives our officers another tool in their tool belt for de-escalating a scene that can be very volatile and fast acting. It can go very quickly, and maybe the DCR can calm this person down with their training and their words. I can tell you that this particular DCR position has no bearing on what our behavioral health navigator is doing. And Melissa is doing phenomenal in her position. And where she fits into this whole plan, if the DCR goes out to the field because 911's called, it's in the middle of the night, we need someone to come talk to this person that's in crisis, we're not calling Melissa to do that. She doesn't go and put herself into a situation that can be very volatile out there. We would call the DCR. But what she would do on the back end, maybe the next day, is start to do the follow-up with that person if they're from the city limits. She would start to do the follow-up and see what kind of services she could offer this person the following day. So kind of doing that type of work. So it doesn't affect Melissa. It is no funding to the city. It's another tool for our officers that says, hey, we have a situation. We're not able to de-escalate this. Perhaps the DCR can. And by having two DCRs, one in the day and one in the evening, they're trying to cover, they won't cover all 24 hours of the day, but they'll get pretty close. And because they're only working in the South End, the amount of time it would take them to get to our scene, if we needed them, would be substantially less than it is now, because right now their DCR and their CIO officer from county is literally covering the entire county. So they could be going from.
Donna, I think we're
Yep.
probably too far down in the weeds
Okay,
here for the finance committee, but
okay.
I think we've got a good overview of what this
Zero
is.
funds.
Zero money is what we want.
Zero
what
money.
We want to hear. And it's just, we're looking for your concurrence because we've got it on the agenda tonight to talk about it, that you would support us applying for this grant.
Yes, I'm very supportive of it.
Thank you.
I agree with the mayor. It's a no-brainer. I'm very supportive as well.
Thank you for that.
Perfect. There's the
Sorry,
answer we're looking for. That's
I
okay.
do like to talk.
It's all right.
I'm sorry. So can I ask you, Mayor, at the 6:30, is that where I'm going to talk more about it, or how does that
No, you're
work?
going to talk less about it.
Less about it.
Hmm.
I can do that.
5
Okay.
minutes. 5 minutes is all you'll
That's
need.
all I got.
All right. Perfect.
Thank
All
you.
right. Enjoy your evening. We'll see you in a bit.
Thank you.
Bye. All right,
Okay.
Noah. She is enthusiastic. Got to appreciate that.
All right, so back to the agenda. So we moved Deputy Chief up. So then the next topic, water utility. So we're going to revisit this again. We're talking about a little bit tonight too at the study session. So coming out of our last CFC conversation last week, there were a couple of questions asked by the council, in particular to exceptions and the water utility code. So that is what this brief presentation is going to focus on, is that specific code and how we treat it as an exception. So the three questions that I have posed in here is that we intend to answer is: what is the current water connection charge? When is a water connection charge paid? And then what exceptions apply to water capital facility charge? And I put up the code here again for the public's use, that we are going to use our Portage Municipal Code to answer these three questions. So as a reminder, the current water capital facility charge is $5,945. And last week we looked at, in the public hearing, alternatives A, B, C, and D. And staff is recommending that we implement alternative D. Now, because of the public hearing, council didn't discuss too much or give too much feedback, but I thought we saw heads nodding that this was an acceptable alternative. So I just want to put this out there for the Finance Committee again as an opportunity to ask questions, or if the Finance Committee is supportive of alternative D.
I am.
I don't have a problem with alternative D. My question basically was, our water system plan is based on a certain amount of growth, and alternative D is not using that number. It's using a number of what the Community Development Department feels growth will be over the next 10 years. And I wanted to make sure the plan could handle that many more ERUs. And I believe Mr. Bond said it really all hinges on the Foster decision and water rights.
Well, I think coupled to that, correct me if I'm wrong, some of the capital facility plan will be implemented based on actual growth or staying ahead of growth. But if we have a downturn, for example, in the growth, we slow down some of those improvements that are related to growth.
Yep.
Both are accurate statements.
Correct.
And yeah.
So I guess the bottom line, John, is it's a moving target.
Right. I totally agree with you, but fortunately, they won't be exactly one for one, but
Right.
they'll be fairly close in following each other's path.
Right.
Mhm.
Okay. Good. I just want to give.
I have one question for you,
Go ahead.
more historical than anything else. The current CFCs, we established that not that long ago. Do you remember when that number was approved?
6 years ago-ish.
6 years?
Ish. Yeah. Seems right. Well, right when I took office or just before.
And prior to that, do you know what it was?
Half of that number, I think. Because I remember Dick Brown screaming bloody murder when we increased it to almost 6,000. I think it was 2,500 or 3,000. Seems like.
Yeah, that's kind of my recollection as well, but I wasn't quite sure of the timing of that.
I just, Dick's testimony's just stuck in my mind, about it. So I could, Noah can probably confirm that number, but or deny that, but I think seems about right to me.
Yeah, if you like, I can look into the exact history and can bring back some dates and dollars.
If you could, I think that would be helpful to understand how frequently we've revisited this number and what kind of changes have occurred.
Okay. Yeah, I'll bring that in time for our next week's meeting
Great.
on the hearing.
I think it'd been 10 years or more though, the prior time, because it'd been quite a while when we touched it.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so I'm not hearing any objection, and it sounds like for the most part, we're fairly supportive of alternative D. Again, that's what the staff intends to bring forward. So I want to spend some time on this specific chapter of our code. This is the water capital facility charge. And when you read this over, you find that the water capital facility charge is designed to mitigate the impact of new demands on our system and is required by new users to pay their fair share of the value of the water system, including but not limited to the water supply, treatment, transmission, storage, and distribution of our facilities. The water capital facilities charge applies to new construction, changes in use, and building modifications, which increase the total number of ERUs. And then in this last little section here, an ERU is defined as 180 gallons per day for non-residential connections. And then prior to connecting to the city's water system, the property owners shall pay, in addition to all other applicable charges such as permit fees and such, the water CFC charge. So again, going back to the three questions, what is the charge? When is it paid? And then the last question we wanted to address is how does the city handle exceptions? So again, this is right out of our Port Orchard Municipal Code. You'll see the reference here, 1304-030, number 3. And what we find here is under the water capital facilities charge exception, the following 4 elements are required to be present in order to qualify for an exception. Okay, they all have to be met in order to even qualify for an exception. The first is a non-residential account. So a non-residential account, meaning a commercial account or a non-residential account, paid the water CFC charge at the time that the property was connected to the system. So pretty straightforward. A non-residential account paid the CFC. B, sometime after the original connection, the property owner decides to change the original use or modify the building. Okay, great. Paid it. Now we're going to change it. C, after the building improvements are completed, the total water usage for the non-residential account will be equal to or less than the usage at the time of the original connection. So that's pretty straightforward, meaning that if they're going to modify it, if it's an increase in our water usage, then again, they fail to meet the exception test. Now, if it's a decrease, then they could qualify for the exception test. And then the last element is the new construction, change in use, or building modification has not resulted in an additional direct connection to our city's water system. So again, I think they're pretty straightforward as you kind of walk down. And the key is that all 4 of these must be met in order to qualify for an exception. So I'm just going to pause to see if you had a question or thoughts before I move on to the next piece of the exception language.
Well, I'm struggling in my mind as to what's the definition of an exception. Is that an exception is to receive
It's
consideration for your prior connection?
Yes, it's an exception to paying, and if I should have put in the full chapter, but there's lots of verbiage. It's an exception to paying the water CFC. Well,
we were presented when we had this discussion. We had one member from the public that wanted at least a credit for the prior fees paid, but my understanding was willing to pay for the additional ERUs, if you will, for the new use of the project.
That's not quite right, John. The property didn't ever pay any charges. And what the ask is his ask is to base his partial exception, because
Right.
on historical water usage, since they didn't pay capital facilities charges. The restaurant used by his math, the equivalent of 17 residential units, and the project's a 39 or 40 unit apartment building is what is being proposed on the property. So he's asking us to redefine the language in our exception,
Right.
as next is Noah's calling it, and provide an exception for historical water usage. And again, today he sent to me, and I forwarded to the council and the staff, an example from Vancouver where they looked back 10 years and they provide, for redevelopment projects, an exception based on historical water usage.
Right. And no, I read all of that information that you forwarded to us and certainly understand that. But I guess the one question, and it's just kind of along the lines of what were the CFC charges? I'm not even sure when that building was constructed, but it's not that terribly old.
We
Yeah.
didn't pay any. We know that.
I'm sorry,
They didn't pay any. We didn't have them at that time.
at that time. So there was no CFC charges.
Right, and
Okay.
So they
what
failed.
I would interject, or the way I read the first slide that Noah had up, is we had basically 5,042 ERUs that make up the existing CFCs.
Right.
Okay, and
Right.
then we're adding to that 3,500 or 4,000, whatever that number becomes. And the where I accept the information that Mr. Baglio gave us is those connection fees are not based on connections, they're based on ERUs. And it's not the fault of the building owner that we were not charging connection fees in the past. And they have a certain number of ERUs that are included in that 5,042 number. Okay,
Correct.
and so they're not, I didn't hear, the words we're playing with are exceptions and credits, and I don't hear it that way. What I hear the request is for existing buildings that are rehabilitating, for a lack of a better word, would like their existing ERUs to be recognized as included in that historic number. And therefore they wouldn't have to pay, they would not have to pay twice, because they're already included in one number, and then we're going to include them in the other number also.
Yeah, I understand that as well, Beck, and I guess I'm assuming that 5,000 ERUs that we have currently, that number was established based on current water usage.
At the time,
with
whenever,
180 gallons for an ERU, so
right,
they would be part of that pre-existing, if you will, rate base.
right.
So no, I gather all that. I'm just trying to make sure that I completely understand, and especially as it relates to were there any prior connection fees. I know years ago we had something very similar to this in regards to the West Bay Shopping Center, and so I would just wanted to make sure I had it straight in my mind.
Yeah, and so I'm trying to be very specific in my presentation here,
Right.
allow you guys to really think through the policy implications, because I think if you read the code over very carefully, at least what I've tumbled to the last week, is it doesn't do a good job of, it stays silent on how to treat mixed use.
Right.
and redevelopment. It's very clear in this particular circumstance. I can make the argument at the time this customer connected to the system, there was no CFC. Cool, he paid it. Check box number 1. He's changing the use. B, cool, check box number 2. But then we come to box 3, C, where now he's increasing the total water usage. That fails the test. So he's excluded now from the exemption. So he might check 2 of the boxes, but he fails it on the 3rd test of this code. And I'm trying to be specific to how the code is crafted. And again, I think the policy conversation that both the mayor has brought up and John and Beck and even Nick and Mark have already talked about this a little bit. It's not very clear in the code how you're going to treat these older historic buildings that did not pay connection fee because there was not one. They're a part of the system, and maybe we're changing the use now, going from commercial or to residential or something thereof in the mix. And the code is the code, and so we follow the code. And I think that's where we're running into this situation. We carried out the code as the code is laid out, but leads itself to the conversation is, do you want to look at a different policy direction that it does not remain silent on this mixed use issue?
And
And I
I
think-
think, yeah, I would be supportive of that. I think we need to look at the code. I think it needs to be clear. I think we would like to see redevelopment in areas of our city, particularly downtown. And most of those commercial buildings have the potential of developing as mixed use. And so we need to be very clear to the developers exactly what their fees are going to be and what their options are.
I was going to mention that it's also important to keep in mind that this is going to apply to the city when we build the community event center, if that project goes forward, because we are converting a bank to a much higher user of water. And so that's going to result in us paying money from our general fund to the water utility if we can't get credit for the connection that was there.
Well, let me, if I may, just bring this down to a level where maybe I can follow it. I live in a house that's built in the 20s. It's been hooked up to the city water system for I don't know how many years before I moved in 30 plus years ago. If I wanted to build an auxiliary dwelling unit on my property, would I then have to pay for my house and the auxiliary unit, or would I get credit for my house and only have to pay for the auxiliary unit?
I think because you're not going to have a new meter, John, you're just going to serve it with, you're not going to get charged anything.
So
And
why my meter is large enough to serve 2 residences?
provided that meter is, yeah, you can get enough water to through your pipe.
So
That's
if I
a bad
can't,
example because our code has a specific mother-in-law provision that I've been talking about having Mark repeal. So I think that has specific code language that is also problematic. It's a separate issue that needs to be fixed.
oh, sorry for bringing that one up then. We'll move on. Go ahead, Noah.
And residentials are 1 for 1 because we don't measure how much water a residence uses. It's these commercial accounts or multifamily that are what's challenging. And as Noah says, our code isn't clear.
I appreciate that, Mayor. I was just trying to come up with something that made sense to me. If I'm going to put additional houses on my property, I should get at least the credit for the one I have now. So,
But what you're not
and it's
doing,
the
John,
same
is
concept that you carry forward to, in my mind at least, if you're going to redevelop a property that at the end of the redevelopment results in more water usage, I should at least get credit for what I paid for initially and pay the difference in where it was compared to where it's going to be.
And I think that's what Mr. Bagley is asking for.
Right.
He's
And,
got
and
39 or
guess
40 units, and he wants credit for the historical usage,
right.
and then he'll pay the delta is what he's
And
asking.
I guess what I'm saying is I agree, but our code is not written sufficiently to allow that. So our code is the problem if we were to agree that that's a reasonable request.
Correct, but it's also going to have a domino effect through the whole redevelopment at the future of the city. So we just need to make sure that we understand that unintended consequences.
How would that be significant in the sense that worst case scenario, everything downtown redevelops?
I think so. If you're looking at,
But if you're basing it on historical water usage, we don't have another lighthouse restaurant. You know, the bank, if we go to build the community center, there's a slight difference and we would like to get the credit. I don't know that there's another high use, the market, you know, the restaurant in the market, but I don't know of any other huge.
Mayor, depending on how far back, because I'm not sure that this needs to go back 50 years or the beginning of time. I think there's probably a cutoff back there that we want to use. But Myri's could be, they were a restaurant.
Mhm.
And
West
you know,
Bay
and it-
Shopping Center.
right, the West Bay Shopping Center. I think there are some that really could have, as Mark indicated, some significant influences on this calculation we're doing. But I also believe that we need to do the right and fair thing. And
Great.
I think we need to take a look at it. And this code that we have, as Noah suggested, doesn't consider mixed use buildings. This code was written before what we anticipate happening. So it really needs to be looked at.
Agreed. Totally.
And there are quite a few restaurants downtown, whether it's the old Myri's or the old Amy's or the Bistro or Lapa Lapas or the Little Mermaid or, you know, the Moon
What
Dog.
about the Suhoi?
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
But
So-
like you said, Beck, we're not going to go back to the beginning of time. The Sioux Hoi
Right.
hasn't been around for 25 years.
Right,
The example we were given was a 10-year look back. And much like this lighthouse, you know, the former lighthouse site, we're still getting, there's twice as many, we're giving less credit than we are getting new connections. So the delta is we are getting a number of new connections. And if we don't treat this equitably, then we likely won't see the development because redevelopment is much more expensive than greenfield development.
Is
Well,
the
and I think
lighthouse
that-
pay- Oh,
The worst case scenario here in my mind is, gee, we get something redeveloped. Granted, it's kind of at the expense of our utility, but not really, because if it gets redeveloped, that results in more ERU usage. We've got more ratepayers to help pay for the operation of the system. So I don't really see a downside to this. We get a revitalized community. We get more residents, if you will, or higher usage. Of course, the general fund would benefit from any kind of commercial activity. I appreciate we're talking potential mixed use, but anyway, I just see this as, I agree with Beck. Our code needs to be revisited and we need to look at it from the standpoint of there's more than just the residential that this thing pretty much indicates.
Are you, go ahead, Nick.
I was going to mention a couple of properties. Obviously, we bought the 640 Bay Street site. And so that had been a bank and then a restaurant and has a connection. So it seems like, do we allow people to turn off their water service and stop paying a utility bill for a period of time? Or is there you must have had service for 3 out of the last 5 years in order to be eligible for a credit so that you're just not totally disconnecting for a period of time and not paying for ongoing maintenance through your rates? Would that?
Mark can answer that. I believe as long as you continue to pay the base fee, you maintain your connection. Once you stop paying the base fee, your connection, your credit, or so it's like we haven't been paying that water bill, I don't believe, on
No,
640 Bay Street. So it wouldn't be eligible because we lost that.
We abandoned that credit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
we abandoned it.
That water meter and connection of sewer, those were disconnected from the system. So that brings up a whole different question is, in a case like that where they may have or probably didn't pay a CFC, but it connected to the system at one time, but then officially disconnected. Now they're going to reconnect. You know,
I'm more sympathetic to somebody that's maintained a connection than we severed that connection by when we stopped paying the base fee.
Right.
Well, I think if we revisit our code, we could certainly address those issues more appropriately. Trying to design the new code here in 5 minutes, I think there needs to be a bit more discussion, but the point in my mind is the code needs to be revisited.
Was the Vancouver model something to base?
I was intrigued by it. I didn't think that was terribly out of line. It seemed to capture it, but I'd like to sit down and reread it again. I
Okay.
scanned it pretty quick this afternoon.
I'm
Is there-
sure that Katie Isaacson would probably have access to a variety of languages that could go in there.
Good point.
The question I have is there something in this rewrite of this policy that we need to do either in conjunction with or before we adopt the CFCs?
That's my question. Yes, we're planning on adopting these CFCs next Tuesday, and I'm not sure that we can rewrite this provision in the code right now. What's realistic? A couple of weeks, 3 weeks?
I guess I don't see them necessarily have to happen simultaneously. I would want to do this rather quickly as we can. But I would think that we could adopt the CFCs and continue to work on this code.
Yeah, I would agree. I would agree with John. And I know Nick and I were talking about working on the water credit piece of the code. We had that in at least our work plan to immediately follow once the CFCs were adopted, so we could work on the credit language code. Seems like, Nick, maybe this would fit in with that kind of concept as well.
Here we go.
Yeah, and I was going to add that, we're talking about, as part of adopting the new CFCs, of having a grace period for projects that came in by a certain date, and we don't want to totally derail their performa. If I would, because the project that is triggering this conversation is ready for issuance pending payment of all fees, we need to make sure that we build a grace period that gives us enough time to amend our code, because otherwise that builder is not going to be able to take advantage of it. The new fees will take effect, and he will be stuck paying the new fees and won't be able to get credit for the existing use.
So Nick, my question is, when does he want to pick up his permits? When does he want to start building? Are we going to hold him up building?
Well, he's required by our code to pick up the land disturbing permit within 60 days of approval. Otherwise, it gets canceled. And so Mark does have the ability to grant an extension to that, but we've been notifying them that they have to pick up their permits. And but they're arguing about how much the water fee should be, which is not clear in our code. So there's some urgency to this from the standpoint that our code doesn't envision people just sitting on approvals forever and not actually pulling the permit, because the permit is valid based on the issuance date, not the approval date. So we'd be extending, we could extend those approvals for a really long time if we didn't set a deadline.
So Nick,
Nick,
go ahead, John.
Well, I was just wondering, kind of along Beck's line of thinking here, you had mentioned a project dealing with their pro forma. Is this something, I'm not sure where they are in that redevelopment, but is it right on the line where until they see this as being changed, that they can't really justify the project yet?
That is what I'm being told. Yeah, but in every developer will tell you that too, though. So
Yeah, that's true. But we can only do what we can do as long as we get on this and move it forward as quickly as we can. Right? Again, that's the best we can do.
So how long are you thinking, Nick and Noah, till that credit language is ready for council?
Well, the credit is separate from this language that we're talking about now. I think the credit language could be done maybe by the end of June, early July. Does that sound about right, Noah?
Yeah, and I don't think Nick, do we have anybody that's interested in that credit? That's
Yeah, the McCormick Development Agreement.
Oh, yeah.
So I would almost think that the ordinance dealing with redevelopment is separate from the credit ordinance and is probably a much simpler, 1 or 2 page ordinance cleaning up some language in one section of code. And then the credit proposal goes forward as its own thing. And, that's probably a 60-day timeline for that as well.
Okay, so 30 days to get the first piece done and the credits 60 days out? Is that more?
That sounds about right. And that makes me think that our grace period under the CFC ordinance that we're putting forward, I had proposed the end of July to be the deadline for paying your connection fees. I think we should probably push that to the end of August, because I want to make sure that if we get bogged down with council and trying to write code for the redevelopment provision, that we don't have the fees increase on somebody before we've adopted our ordinance. I don't want to rush us too much.
So that's a good segue to Nick to move us along, because I did want to talk about the implementation of the CFCs. So as Nick discussed, maybe I'll just turn it back over to Nick as far as what he proposed, how we would implement this new fee. The plan was to have it adopted next week, and then go ahead, Nick, as far as how we would implement it.
Yeah, so we pulled some data on ready to issue permits, as well as permits that are submitted and pending review. And these are all building permits. We have probably 40 permits that have come in that are either pending or in a ready to issue status right now. And 2 of those are massive multifamily projects. Two of the ones that are pending are massive multifamily projects. I think one is 57 units and the other one is 216 units. And then there are 2 multifamily permits ready to issue that the developer can come pick up anytime. And that's this 429 Bay Street, the Cheers restaurant redevelopment, as well as the Sinclair apartments, which are 100% ready to issue. When we pulled the list, there were probably a dozen or so single family and commercial permits that were also pending review. All of those have come in fairly recently, and since we've started talking about increasing CFCs, and presumably they will be ready to issue even before we pass an ordinance. Even if we pass it on the 25th, it takes effect at a minimum 5 days after publication. So I think most of those single family units could avoid the fee increase if they needed to, but the apartments both came in January, and we are still doing plan review. So we propose to draw a line March 1st. If you had submitted your application by March 1st and the city still hasn't completed your plan review, we're going to give you a grace period that would allow you to pay the current CFC rate through I had initially proposed July 31st, but based on our conversation just now, I think we should go to August 31st, so that as long as you had submitted your building application before March 1st, you get a little bit more time under the current fee structure. As I mentioned, there are 2 apartment projects that are ready to issue, and so they can come in now and pay even before we increase the fee, or they would have until the August 31st deadline. And then there's 2 projects in review that we think should be ready to issue by mid to late summer, and so they would be able to come in and pay their connection fee prior to August 31st at the lesser rate. Anybody who came in after May 1st for a permit, their fees will change on the effective date of the ordinance. The last point on the effective date is, because we have to change forms and content on our website and things in SmartGov, we'd like the effective date to be June 14th, which is the second Monday of June. And so that's normally we make things effective 5 days after publication. This would be more like just under 3 weeks after publication. And that gives us time to adjust all of our materials and also help spread out any sort of rush to get things picked up prior to the change. So it's really 3 pieces: changing the effective date to June 14th, giving a grace period. If you are in by March 1st, you have until August 31st, or council could pick another date. Noah and I were kind of talking about a range from July 1st until October 1st, which is when the CPI adjustment takes effect. But I think that August 31st gives us time to amend our code and hopefully solve this issue that Mr. Baglio has raised.
Will that meet the needs of the Tarragon group?
Yes, they did get back to me and said that they would be able to. I think their big concern is that they don't want to pay connection fees until they also are able to pick up building permits. I think that we feel reasonably confident that based on the number of revisions that they're going to have to make to their plans, they should be able to get those back to us and have permits in hand by the end of August. We were thinking by the end of July, but certainly by the end of August.
Okay.
For me to pick another date would be somewhat arbitrary on my part. If you think August 31st makes sense, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I think August 31st is reasonable unless I receive information between now and next week, which changes my
Right.
mind, such as if our plan review consultant, Mike Barth, came back and said, hey, these apartments have to be totally redesigned, then I would say, well, if they're going to have to do that much work, they may need a little bit more time. But so far I haven't heard that, and I am trying to get that answer before the council packet is printed for next week's meeting.
Okay, so why do we have the grace period for those permits that were in by March 1st and not by the day it goes into effect?
Well, I think part of the reason is that we have been slow in our plan review because our building official or our building plan reviewer retired. They submitted in January, and we're supposed to turn these things around in 120 days. And so we are pushing up against our review period for those projects. And we have not, our goal has always been to turn things around in 8 weeks. And we are certainly running longer than that for more complex projects right now. So I think part of the reason is because we have not been prompt in our plan review, or as prompt as we aim to be in our plan review. And also the pro forma for these projects is really, I mean, it's a $1.3 million hit to the
Right.
Tarragon apartments.
No, what my question really is, Nick, is if I came, we're not, the new CFC charge is not going to go into effect until June 14th. Okay.
Correct.
So why is it that if I come in with a permit on June 1st, I do not get the old fee?
You do get the old fee if you come in on June 1st.
If you
Well-
pull your
well-
permit, what we're trying to avoid, Beck, is if a rush of not substantially complete packets just rushing in the door to try to beat the deadline. We're trying to be accommodating those that have done due diligence, have a pro forma, and the delay is on our side, not something that they've done.
And you have a considerable plan review fee that you pay when you submit something. And so those people have actually spent money with an expectation, and that expectation is changing because we're changing our policy. Anybody who since March, I mean, we started talking about the water issue 2 or 3 months ago. And so I think the reason for the March 1st deadline is that anybody who's been paying attention has had some idea that the fees are going to increase. And so their decision-making should at least be in part based on the knowledge that fees are going to change. If you wanted to change the March 1st deadline, you certainly could. We talked about April 1st or May 1st as well. But the projects that came in after March 1st are primarily single family residences, and
Okay,
those
so-
should be ready to issue.
So therein lies the difference. The difference is I'm thinking about Mr. and Mrs. Smith, who's going to build a house. You're thinking about McCormick Land Development that's going to build 50 houses,
Right.
or an apartment building that's, a significant thing.
Right. And
Mrs.
I think
Smith
that we're
can
still turning around single family plan reviews in 4 to 6 weeks.
Okay.
So any of those permits that are in right now for review are presumably going to be ready to issue by June 14th, and it's up to the developer to come pay for their permit, or the builder.
Any other discussion on this? You comfortable with what you're hearing?
I am.
I'm sure we're going to hear it all again at work study.
Yeah.
Yes, we are.
Yep.
Okay, then we can move on. I think we have some good direction, and we'll talk about it at the work study and get some further direction, and then go from there. So I guess I'll turn over to Mark. Mark, this is item number 4, the Bethel Mitchell design amendment. You had wanted to bring back some more discussion and cost estimates.
Yeah, so this will be really quick so that you have a chance to use the facilities before 6:30. So we've got a scope and budget back from Skillings, and we looked at some cost savings, basically using city Vector and city staff to help in potholing. We did the same thing with Tremont, and we were able to get that number down to just under 200,000. So their contract is about, current contract is $538,000. So we'll be looking at adding a couple, another third to get that design as a standalone ad alternate. So that depending on how we fare with the TIB, we can either include it or not include it. Bottom line is, this is the most efficient way for us to get an actual design of that intersection that we know is going to be impacted by the Bethel Lincoln Lund roundabout. So I think that's a very wise move to go through this process without having to go through a whole procurement process. So 200,000 to add to the current Skillings contract, and 1.1 million is the cost estimate right now that has a 20% contingency on it. And that's what we're going to be seeking TIB funds to add to our current highway safety improvement plan funds. So, and then when we talk,
How we would pay for that is we have nearly 500,000 in traffic impact fee dollars that we were going to spend next year on the multimodal design out on Old Clifton. And so we weren't going to get to that this year anyway. So we would do a budget amendment. We have those dollars, I believe. And we would, so just be able to advance the design now, and we can look at the mid-year review, what dollars we've got for construction for this roundabout, and then picking the projects that we want to advance as other designs next year with the additional dollars that seem to be coming in quite rapidly.
and remember that TIB was very supportive of this add-on to this project because of continuity of pedestrians, the connectivity between the two roundabouts, and that movement of traffic onto Mitchell North to the high school or to the bus barn. So they felt like it was going to score very well, and it was within the price range that they would be comfortable knowing the $8 or $9 million that they anticipate coming into this region during the 2021 urban arterial program cycle. So that's where we're at.
Hey,
So does the finance, I guess I'm just getting clear direction. Is this where we're going, Mayor? Is that we're going to do a budget adjustment for the 1.5A tip, 1.5A Old Clifton Road for this phase of design?
That's our recommendation. If the finance committee concurs, we'll try to get that on the agenda next week, Mark, or first meeting in June. Then you'll see a contract and scope of work for the additional design dollars.
I'm glad we have a way to cover that. We have an opportunity here to move that design forward for the roundabout. We should take advantage of whatever we can to get that done.
Yeah, it creates a much better project. And that was one thing that even Skillings and Victor Salmon at TSI, they all agreed that this was an unintended consequence of the Bethel roundabout, but we all agreed that it was a necessary add-on if we could somehow make it happen, to make that a much safer, the whole Mitchell Y, Bethel, Lundberg, Lincoln intersection.
And if we think about what, because the state is doing a roundabout at Bay and Beach Drive, correct?
Correct.
And then you would travel north and have the roundabout at the bowling alley, and then the roundabout at Mitchell or at
Lumber.
Lundberg. Yeah,
Yeah,
Yeah, we just need to get that roundabout at Lund now.
yeah, exactly.
We thought we'd be working from the other direction, but it's just falling into place that going this direction might make more sense.
or going north to south instead of south to north.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay,
I did want to say with regard to the Old Clifton Road design, we're doing the sub-area planning for McCormick Village, and we released our community survey. We already have, I think, 240 responses, which is in 4 days is more responsiveness than I have ever seen on any project in Port Orchard.
outstanding.
Just reading through the responses, one of the number one concerns is being able to walk on Old Clifton and get to the park and get to the area that we're planning. And so that's coming through loud and clear. And I think it still is important to keep that project in focus, because that's how we're going to be able to tell the community that, look, we've budgeted money for this project and it's in the work plan. We are designing those improvements as we're preparing the plan for this this development area.
And you're still gonna have $250,000 remaining in this fund. And we can focus this separated path around what McCormick is designing with the McCormick entry roundabout and the Campus Parkway roundabout. So we could still focus a design that really takes between Campus Parkway and McCormick Woods and the park and really do that piece.
Break it into segments is what you're saying.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, I think, to connect the two roundabouts, just so that people can walk from all of the neighborhoods to get, get at least through the central area of the corridor.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and can we make sure then that this gets on the Transportation Committee's agenda for next week?
Yeah.
Thanks.
What would you like on the transportation, the Old Clifton discussion?
Right, if we're talking transportation things here, not just money things. And
Yeah.
so I think that the Transportation Committee needs to be up to date on what's happening.
Okay.
Okay, anything more on Bethel, Mitchell? So I think we have completed our agenda. We have 20 minutes before the next meeting, I think. Does it start at 6:30?
Yes.
Okay, so anything for the good of the order? Otherwise, we are adjourned. Thank you very much.